Mauricio Meza hablará sobre la interactividad como proceso de creación, un acercamiento al potencial epistémico de la UPIC. Para quienes no saben qué es la UPIC, Unidad Pedagógica e Informática del CEMAMU, del Centro de Estudios en Matemática y Automática Musicales, fundado por Xenakis.
Bueno.
Mauricio, bienvenido, pues.
Hola, buenas tardes.
Hola.
Sí, gracias, Julio.
Agradecemos además bastante más a Mauricio, bastante más que a cualquiera, porque acaba de pasar por el COVID, y quienes hemos pasado por ahí sabemos lo difícil que es estar con la misma energía. Bienvenido y muchas gracias, Mauricio.
Sí, no hay de qué, pero de hecho sí tengo que aclarar que justamente por esa causa he tenido que modificar el título de mi ponencia y el abstract. Y de hecho la voy a dar en inglés porque a un momento dado Tsier me pidió que lo diera en inglés y me enteré muy tarde de que iba a haber una traducción.
Ya.
¿Sí?
Podrán entonces traducirte del inglés al español, supongo.
Sí, espero, sí. Sí.
En todo caso, sube un poquito tu volumen al máximo, porque tu voz es un poquito bajita.
No se oye mucho. ¿Ahí me oyen mejor?
Sí, ahí está mejor, sí.
Ah, ok. Tengo una cuestión con el micrófono. A ver.
Bueno, se oye un poquito ruidoso también ahorita.
Sí, porque estoy tocando el micrófono, pero
Bueno, okay.
ahorita
Bueno,
ya se quita.
muchas gracias y bienvenido, Mauricio.
Gracias, gracias. Muchas gracias. Okay. So, the creative process, transology, and interactivity, an approach to the epistemic potential of the UPIC. This is the abstract, but I didn't have the time to send to ITCR. I will pass it to gain some time. This is the plan of my expose. I will first make an introduction that could seem a little bit large. I will introduce some of the notions that I am working with in my doctoral thesis project. Then I will go deeper into the digital transology problem. After that, I will just make a very brief introduction to the UPIC, and then the comparative analysis of A1 and Xen alpha. First of all, I have to clarify that this work of research makes part of my doctoral thesis project in musicology and creation. The object of study of my thesis is artificial memory in the creative process, musical creative process. I'm working within the frame of three epistemological axes: epistemology of musical creative process, epistemology of technique and technology, and epistemology of data. I am pursuing an exploration of a model of the creative process that can be synthesized in this graphic, where we have two temporal frames. One is the frame of a cycle of three phases of the process. These three phases are three modes of activity in the process of creation. One is capturing information. Then the second one is analyzing the information. This is the phase that I call trace. And transferring the product of the analysis. Here, capturing should be understood as the operation of exchanging information between the interactive sound stream and the dynamically engaged body. I am talking about a process where that is mediated by computers, and the sound stream is an interactive sound stream. Capturing deals with the data entry and data collecting operation in the context of dialogical situations taking place in interactive sound environments. Tracing or tracking involves interrogating the data collected during the capture processes in order to determine what might function as material for compositional purposes. Here, the composer, in the manner of an archaeologist or archivist, studies the data structures, the data structures generated in the environment, and thus determines about their relevance for a composition project to be realized. Transferring is the operation that leads to the enactment of what has been given during the previous stages, and thus establish ideally the conditions to that the interactive dialogical situation can be formally reactualized. In my research project, I am proposing two modes of interactivity. One should be non-dialogical. This is the interactivity. Let me clarify between interaction and interactivity. Interaction is a more general term, and I conceive interactivity as the activity with computers, interaction with computers. Interactivity, non-dialogical interactivity. Interactivity is not the project. It doesn't make part of the creative process. In dialogical interactivity is central in the creative process. What prevails is discovery. It implies a retroactivity of listening and eventually a listening of the machine. The machine, according to a very important reference for the construction of my arguments and ideas, is Gilbert Simondon, who calls the machine, any machine, an alagmatic being. What is alagmatics? Alagma, from the verb alatein in Greek, means change, exchange, or exchanged reality. Simondon calls alagmatic a general theory of exchanges and modifications, a general theory of transformations. We can also say that it is the theory of operations, according to Simondon. While science in general has its object of study the structures of reality in the domains within which they deal, the alagmatic deals with operations. The operation is what makes a structure appear, or which modifies a structure. A conversion of a structure into another structure, according to Simondon. Operation and structure are the ontological complement of each other, and one cannot be defined apart from the other. Defining an operation will come down to defining a certain convertibility of the operation into a structure and of the structure into an operation. When Simondon writes that the machine is an alagmatic being, it is to dispute whether it is essentially a being of power or a useful reality, which is characterized by what it is used for, by its effectiveness as a means of carrying out a task, its use in a particular profession. The machine is a mediation. Instead, the machine is a mediation between man and the world, a relational term. It puts man in relation to the world and brings him information about the world at the same time as it carries out the task ordered. This is which corresponds to the fact that any technical object is always more or less an instrument providing information and not just a tool useful and effective for something. The true essence of the machine, quote of Simondon, the true essence of the machine is to establish this communication. The machine is a relational reality, a reality of exchanges, transforming the one who uses it at the same time as it transforms what he applies it to. While every positive science is a science of generic structures, the alagmatic is a science of genetic operations. Okay, definition of traceology. It comes from anthropology. Coming from archaeology instead, the concept of traceology is to be understood as functional analysis that aims to determine the function of tools by studying the traces produced during their use. In this research project, digital traceology should be understood as the study of digital traces generated in interactive digital systems. That is to say, the study of energetic informational captures from any kind of human activity happening in the context of interactive situations, giving rise to inscriptions in memory in digital machines. The problem of the digital trace, according to François David Seva, is that the digital trace leads to the point of disjoining the two constituent elements in productive tension of the trace itself: presence and absence, singularity and repeatability, leaving them falling apart from each other. The risk with digital technology is that it has too much trace, too much intensity of trace, too much immediacy because of too much repeatability, and therefore no more trace. Jaleo Colomb proposes a solution: a technological approach to digital traces capable of taking accountability of computational machines, a technological concept that is a non-anthropocentric concept of the digital trace. It should be reminded that computing requires from objects and actions that they pass through digital inscriptions to exist. Computational machines are involved in the process of production of digital traces that a technological semiotics would allow to describe. How such a process how such a process of production of digital traces could inform us about the process that leads to the emergence of musicality. In view of what is established by the precedent elements of reflection presented in this introduction, and from the perspective of a composer engaged in musicological research, one of the emergent questions from our analysis is that of the role of corporeality, that is embodiment, in the poetics of composers. If by using computational methods, it could be possible to give account of the relationship between the body, imagination and imaginary, musicality, the emergence of musicality, what can digital traces, understood as transferred corporeal dynamism, teach us about what takes place in the realm of creative interactive situations with sound? Digital traces involve body dynamics taking place in a particular context of interactivity, such as that of improvisation with computers. Although compositional processes mediated by computers involve at least some level of interactivity, yet not always demanding a corporeal engagement from the composer. Our aim is to study those cases where there is a composer's strong corporeal dynamic engagement, which is then captured and inscribed in artificial memory. In particular, those cases where this data is turned into material for compositional activity. Okay, now that I exposed some of the problematic and the hypothesis, I will give an état des larges of the usage of digital traces, both in musicological research and in musical creation. In the field of musicological research, a methodology based on the use of digital traces for the analysis of electroacoustic music interpretation is currently being developed in a project led by Pierre Coupry at IREMUS in Paris, where Coupry has created Motus Lab Tool, a software allowing for recording and analyzing the gestures of performers as they interpret electroacoustic works. What is recorded here is the sliders of the mixing board. Furthermore, the use of digital traces may as well be related to a particular domain of research dealing with the statistical analysis of data collections, music information retrieval, a research domain that has produced an important body of documentation sources and technical developments, and which aims at the implementation of methods for computational analysis of digital musical streams. The automated organization of musical playlists by means of semantic databases in the domain of commercial distribution of music in the internet is one example of the application of knowledge generated by the type of research such as music information retrieval. Closer to our inquiry interest, the interdisciplinary research work on Roger Reynolds' The Angel of Death, a one-of-a-kind investigation initiative on which it was made usage of a database created from what the audience expressed while listening to Reynolds' piece in concert. The database was built through a real-time sensor interface crafted by an IRCAM team. The function of such a device was to provide the means for a dynamic capture of the gestures of the audience during turning them into information for statistical analysis. The analysis of the data collected during the concert had to provide information about the perception of formal elements of the piece during its execution. According to Stephen McAdams, the goal of this project was to bring objective elements of reflection to questions raised within a research approach that marries the methods and frameworks of the cognitive sciences with the human sciences in the domain of music. Here, the idea of asking the public about their perception of a musical flow being unveiled in concert and to capture this information through a digital sensor device leading to a set of digital traces remains, to our knowledge, a premiere. In the domain of musical creation, practices and approaches using either traces, imprints, tracks, or even borrowed materials could be examples of creative behavior linked to the problematic we are trying to build from the perspective of the digital trace phenomenon. Christian Markley, for example, and his collage composed by mixing vinyl records can be mentioned on the use of borrowed materials. On the other hand, for Nicolas Donnan, an important precedent of what he calls an aesthetic of the imprint is Gerard Grisey's proposal for an instrumental synthesis, which can be heard at the end of his work Period, and which was composed from the image of a sonogram analysis of a sound spectrum. This is an historical example of the use of a visual representation of the analysis of natural phenomena for the means of composition and orchestration. On the other way around, Philippe Leroux has made usage of gestural imprints, yet capturing them into digital devices. In his work, Voirex, the spatialization is controlled by gesture information captured offline. By means of a digital interface, such as a mouse, Leroux handwrote some words coming from the same text chosen by the composer for the piece. Once captured in the digital realm and transferred to a computer-assisted composition environment, the data used from the dynamics and the forms of Leroux handwriting was given different functions like programming the parameters for the spatialization of the electronic part of the fifth movement of the piece. This technique was also employed by the composer in another work called Extended Apocalypsis. Furthermore, in Vixit Musicus, Leroux enlarged this practice by taking as a calligraphic referent the manuscript of Ma fin et mon commencement by Guillaume de Machaut. Leroux proceeds by overriding the pneumatic notations found on a copy of Machaut manuscript, while at the same time capturing the dynamism of his hand movements by means of an interactive paper interface. Then turning the dynamic forms coming from his hand strokes into materials for the composition of the rhythmic, harmonic, and melodic elements of the work. Okay, so just a brief display of images of the UPIC. And for the ones that do not know what it is, Julio has given a brief description. I'm also going to give a very brief description of it. So as Julio also said, UPIC stands for Unité Pédagogique du Semamu, Pédagogique Unique of Semamu. It was developed by Xenakis at the Center of Mathematical and Automatic Musical Studies in Paris in 1977. The UPIC is a graphic tablet connected to a computer with a vector display. The user draws waveforms and envelopes, which are then processed by the computer. The x-axis represents the time, and the y-axis the frequencies. There have been two versions of the UPIC. In the second version, waveforms can be transposed, flipped, inverted, and subject to several transformation algorithms. This same second system allows for real-time performance and by moving the stylus on the tablet. Here we have Iannis Xenakis demonstrating the UPIC. This is a very short list of the works composed by Xenakis with the UPIC. Mycène Alpha in 1978, Torifani in 87-88, and Voyage Absolu des Sunari vers Andromède in 1989. A few more clichés of the UPIC. Also a short list of composers and pieces that were created with this machine. This is a short list that comes from a double CD that came out in 2001 by Mod Records. And here we have Julio Estrada demonstrating the UPIC in around 1980. Okay. Before I come to the analysis, I would like to say some words about the relationship between Ewa On, the work that Estrada created with UPIC, and Ewa On, which is a work created many years later for large orchestra. In 1980, Mexican composer Julio Estrada composed Ewa On for UPIC, a piece entirely composed of synthesized sounds. Characterized by its violently sounding continuity, the compositional experience involved in the creation of this work will lead the composer's process from a conception of sound, the continuous macro timbre, to the creation of a composition method, the pronoacoustic transcription method, to an aesthetic project, the continuum. After having already consolidated the main lines of his work with the continuum, Estrada will compose between 1994 and 1995 Ewa On Ome. Ewa On means to fly, and Ewa On could be translated as to fly again. Ewa On Ome. Composed for large orchestra, which I consider a transferential sequel of Ewa On. This case is of particular concern in the sense that Estrada leads his creative process from the composition of an electronic music work to the composition of a piece for large orchestra, maintaining some kind of genetic link between both pieces. A very important aspect of the creative process engaged in the composition of these works is that it encompasses the use of technology both as a memorial device and as a mediation one within an interactive approach to composition. Moreover, the UPIC allowed the composition of synthetic sounds by drawing, giving place to a graphic score. The analogical correspondence between these graphics and the sound results, as well as the interactive context of their production, and the transfer of the information captured during the interactive experience to the instrumental domain signify, in the framework of this research project, a very important precedent of what could be a practice of composition as a traceological process. Now, Mycène Alpha was composed in 1978. I will show some excerpts of the score. And an excerpt of the score of Ewa On. And I think Manuel Rocha is not around, but I thank Manuel for the scan of the score and for allowing me to have a copy of this document. Okay, so now let us take the opportunity of a comparative analysis from a traceological point of view of two excerpts of graphic scores drawn with the UPIC. On the left hand, an excerpt taken from Ewa On by Estrada. On the other, an excerpt from Mycène Alpha by Xenakis. What we observe in the case of Estrada is, first of all, a fairly intense gestural activity, giving rise to a very dense graphic and an aural texture. It looks like an approach that proceeds by the accumulation of the same type of gesture. Meanwhile, on the side of Mycene alpha, of the Mycene alpha excerpt, we observe a gestural activity that could in turn be associated to a more reflexive attitude in regards to what should come to be a sound texture obtained by means of drawing. This is an approach that seems to proceed by composing the sound from an idea, a mental image, of a drawing. While in the case of Ewaon, the analogy ratio between gesture, graphic, and sound seems to be narrower. Moreover, a dramatic component can be stated as we observe the graphic traces of what was the experience of creation of Ewaon. Indeed, the blackened accumulation of lines that crosses the space of the apsis and ordinate at a seemingly tight split regime in the middle of the excerpt violently splits the score, yet without inducing a breaking off in the flow of sound energy. This raises the idea of a rather obsessive-compulsive being in trance, mind, and an emotional state, taking over at this particular point of what was the experience of composition of Estrada's piece. At this point, it might be allowed to say that we are here in presence of a process in which, situated in a dialogical relationship with sound, the structural coupling of listening or hearing, i.e. inner listening or inner hearing, with the dynamism of the body, informs the construction of a dramaturgy which will be that of a listening in emergence, i.e. the birth of listening or the deconstruction and reconstruction of listening. That is, the world is crumbling down and it's being built again. We conclude that in the case of Ewaon, it is rather a performative kind of listening, i.e. a listening in the making, that overweights the graphic dimension of the experience, the creative experience of the process. At this point, it becomes necessary to underline, at the conclusion of this brief analytical passage, two very important aspects. First, as to the nature of the analyzed objects, it must be pointed out that these are no more graphic representations of sound than graphic traces of what was a sensorial and interactive experience of sound. By making it possible to compose the sound by drawing, the UPIC generates at the same time the traces of its use. Indeed, these drawings are much more the graphic traces of the utilization of the UPIC than graphic musical scores. Secondly, these traces tell us about the relationship between two domains of reality coexisting in the interactive experience with sound and musical environments, such as the UPIC. What we observe is the traces of a dynamism of the body involved in the composition of a dynamism of sound. Now, before I get to my conclusion, I would like to propose you to listen to Ewaon with the score, with the drawing, sorry. This will last 8 minutes, and then is my conclusion. Do we have the time? ¿Tenemos tiempo para escuchar la pieza?
Si puedes ponerla en abreviado, estaría bien, para no abultar, ¿no?
Vamos a escuchar un fragmento.
Ya iniciado. Si quieres, hacia la mitad, mejor, ¿no? Comenzar en la mitad. Ok.
De acuerdo.
Gracias.
Okay, well, we are going to listen to an excerpt.
Mauricio, no escuchamos el audio, disculpa.
Debe ser porque no puse compartir el audio. Una disculpa. ¿Puedo salir un poquito aquí para ver si puedo activar el audio con la pantalla? Se me hace que no le di ahí. Déjenme tantito rápido para esto.
Sí, ok.
Sí. Una disculpa.
Se acabó tu sonido, Mauricio, creo. Si quieres podemos ir a la conclusión directamente. Hola, Mauricio.
Le mando un mensaje de WhatsApp de que no se les escucha.
Perdón, había un problema aquí. Una disculpa.
Aquí estás.
Sí.
Pasemos directamente a las conclusiones, querido Mauricio. Como no están escritas, tendrás que inventarlas.
Okay. We present an état de l'art about digital traces that give account of historical elements in musicological research and in musical creation. We then offered, from a traceological perspective, a comparative analysis of works by Julio Estrada and Iannis Xenakis. At this point, it should be underlined that, y sí, voy a tener que darlas porque se me acaba de apagar. Una disculpa. Voy a tener que sacar mi documento aquí, porque se me apagó mi tablet. Ay, ay, ay.
No te preocupes. El tiempo mexicano no corre tan rápido. Ya están Salvador y Hugo arreglando esa.
Sí me escuchan, ¿verdad?
Sí.
Okay. We presented an état de l'art about digital traces that gave account of historical elements in musicological research and in musical creation. We then offered, from a traceological perspective, a comparative analysis of works by Julio Estrada and Iannis Xenakis. At this point, it should be underlined that what came to inform our descriptions of these experiences of creation is a set of traces, withholding a particular status not only for the purposes of this particular traceological analysis, but perhaps also for what could be a more accurate description of a compositional environment such as that proposed by Xenakis. From the observation of the traces left by these creative experiences, the purpose of our analysis was to find elements that can inform us as to the qualities of what it was the experience of listening in the context of an interactive situation involving sound, an interactive and creative situation. The graphical traces that we compared here are obviously analogical. However, a digital computer was in the core of the device, having captured and collected these traces. This means that these graphic traces may have had, at some point, a digital correlate. In the singular case of the UPIC environment, this digital correlativity has a particular function, that of the mediation between graphic and sound textures, and thus serves to establish a structural coupling between gesture and listening, similar to that taking place during the playing of a musical instrument. This digital correlate is a digital complementary part of the analogic graphics trace. An analysis of this digital component could inform us in quantitative terms about the compositional experience of both E1 and Mycene alpha. Beyond enriching our description criteria concerning this type of sensorial and creative process, what will be the compositional purpose of an analysis of such dynamic digital traces resulting from this kind of interactive situation involving sound? Concerning the relationship between the electronic work and the orchestral one, E1 on the one hand and E1 on the other hand, by Estrada, while giving rise to a new way of approaching instrumental composition by means of exploring the orchestral potentials of what we consider as a set of inscriptions, a set of traces, within the very own creative and historical process of the composer himself. Estrada amplified at the same time his own poetic environment. In fact, the relationship between E1 and E1 withholds in the system that thus it constitutes a set of characteristics that place this couple of pieces in a particular terrain of compositional activity. Such an approach to composition stands near to what we conceive as composition's strategical process. In the forthcoming outputs of our investigations, these two music works will be of very particular interest. Indeed, we still have to determine to what extent analogical and digital traces played an important part in the genetic link between both pieces and thus in the composition of E1 Ome. Furthermore, capturing, tracing, transferring in the context of a formalized digital convergence suggests an approach to musical creation involving a convertibility between structures and operations. This convertibility is central to the problem of digital traces. In this sense, we believe that a set of propositions based on this methodology will allow us to test for compositional intentions different kinds of digital traces in their potentials, both operative and structuring. And please allow me to aggregate another element of conclusion, a last one, if you don't mind. What UPIC has always been offering as an opportunity, besides the great opportunity of drawing sound, the opportunity of memorizing the creative process. It seems like we were unaware of the coming of sophisticated gesture control interfaces, like, for example, meta-instrument, 3D printers, and force feedback interfaces, and so on and so forth. It seems like the problem was technical memory, where it was probably not problematized enough from an artistic standpoint. Maybe the only person that was aware of the potentiality of memorization that could be an extension of the UPIC was the person that destroyed, probably because of resentment, the magnetic tapes containing the code of each work created with UPIC. There is a missing link. Opportunity for new works, new forms of insight into the creative process. That sound is only one side of the process. The drawing is another side, and the code inscribed in memory is another. Extending the experience into other forms, this could allow us to extend the experience, the creative experience, into other forms of representation, other potential modalities of the experience and of the process. With this, I mean, Xenakis creative process was from its core an interdisciplinary one. With the UPIC, he went as far as he could, because technically we could not yet imagine how fast the development of memorization, artificial memory, could be. Nonetheless, this interdisciplinarity is also incarnated in the UPIC, but it can be extended if we take the advantage of memorization. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Mauricio, por tu intervención y por el esfuerzo que has hecho para hacer esta presentación. Realmente muy ilustrativa de tu pensamiento y del trabajo que estás haciendo, además, en tu propio doctorado. Yo quisiera incitar a algunas preguntas pidiendo que sean lo más breves posibles, porque estamos ya con el tiempo de la siguiente presentación encima. Sería ahora Judith Romero quien exponga, pero si hay preguntas muy concisas, muy concretas, por favor, para Mauricio.
Pues solo hay un comentario.
Ok.
Dice que existe una herramienta que es heredera de la UPIC y está abierta para descarga y uso en la composición y el arte medial. Y en los comentarios nos pegan la dirección donde se puede ver. Y es el comentario que veo que está aquí en el chat nada más.
Muy bien. Sí, está remitiendo a la UPIC de Xenakis, a la Iannis, me imagino, ¿no?
Exacto, sí.
Es la versión que han desarrollado últimamente, la Iannis, sí. Es muy útil, sí, si quieren acceder a ella, desde luego. Ahí está Mauricio, con la intención de avanzar, si tienes algún comentario final que hacer en español, apórtalo y ya pasamos a la exposición de Judith. Tú dime.
Bueno, nada más rápidamente. Sí, bueno, Iannis yo lo conozco, claro que sí. No hablé de eso porque ya hay muchas cosas, ¿no?, que tenía que decir. Creo que hay otras versiones de software de este mismo tipo de proyecto. Lo que me parece un problema con este tipo de propuesta es que se está dejando de lado la parte de desarrollo de interfaces de captura, interfaces gestuales, de captura de gesto. Y creo que también hay una cuestión, la misma cuestión que estoy subrayando, no ha sido tomada en cuenta, que es la cuestión de memorizar y crear grandes bases de datos del proceso de creación. Es un proceso de creación muy particular el que propone la UPIC. Y creo que lo acabamos de ver con los dos ejemplos, la manera en cómo tú lo abordaste y la manera en cómo lo abordaba Xenakis. En los gráficos se ve todo, se ve la personalidad, se ve cómo fue el proceso de creación, se ve el pensamiento, ¿no? Lamentablemente, tenemos, para mí, desde mi punto de vista, tenemos una documentación incompleta. Si tuviéramos los datos y pudiéramos analizar también el proceso a partir de los datos con la gráfica, pues quién sabe qué más podríamos descubrir, ¿no? Sobre si además continuáramos el proceso, este tipo de trabajo, si se volviera una constante en el taller, ¿no? Con este tipo de interfase, que obtendríamos como emergencias y como descubrimientos del propio proceso de creación, haciendo uso de las capacidades que tenemos ahora a nuestra disposición de memorización artificial.
Ya. Pues muy oportuno tu comentario, y además remite a tu propia exposición, y desde luego abre la puerta a una mayor investigación sobre sistemas similares al de la UPIC, lo cual es muy estimulante. En realidad la UPIC abrió un panorama que, digamos, revolucionó a una buena parte de los músicos y a los no músicos, para entender que era mucho más accesible hacer música para los no músicos e incluso para los músicos de lo que los sistemas de música permitían hasta entonces. Creo que esta es una de las grandes contribuciones, y se puede cerrar aquí en este punto el abordaje muy breve sobre la UPIC, Mauricio.